Hello, I'm Wayne Utterback, Director of Communications and Digital Content for the Illinois Association of Park Districts, and welcome to the latest edition of the Parkcast. Today, I'm really excited to talk about bison grazing with McHenry County Conservation District agricultural ecologist Brenna Ness and natural resource manager Brad Woodson. Thank you so much for both of you taking time out of your day to talk with me a little bit about bison grazing of all things. It's not something that I hear a lot about, so I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit more about how this all came to fruition.
Sure. Thanks, Wayne, for having us on. So the prairie evolved with bison, and they played an important role in the ecological health of the prairie and grasslands. And they're an excellent habitat management tool. So for that reason, the conservation district has wanted to reintroduce bison on the landscape for a long time, but the conditions were never really quite right. And the opportunity finally presented itself at our Pleasant Valley site when the previous tenant, who had been utilizing the land for row crops and cattle production, no longer wished to renew his lease. So we put together a request for proposals. And it was actually through the Northeast Illinois Farm Link, which is managed by Liberty Prairie Foundation, that we became connected with Rooter Bison, who's now raising bison at Pleasant Valley. And Rooter Bison is a family business that raises bison to protect habitat for native wildlife and to be a locally sourced alternative to beef. So they were a great match for the conservation district.
Now, just a quick question about just bison in general. So you've got somebody who already knows how to handle bison, how to manage them, because that was going to be my next question was how do you prepare to take on that responsibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah. So, as Brenna mentioned, we put this RFP out. We had the option of working with cattle producers. And so when we had this, when Rooter Bison submitted their request, we thought this is great. We have somebody who knows bison, knows how to build a fence, knows how to corral them. So really it's a unique arrangement where we're providing the land. They actually built the fence. They're managing the bison herd, the numbers and the movements, things like that. So really it's a kind of a unique partnership where, again, it works out for us. We have the land, we want the prairie to be grazed, and they're looking for habitat. They're looking for areas to graze these bison. So it's really a great win-win situation for us.
Now, how many bison are there currently out there on the prairie?
Yeah. Currently, there are 6 bison on 30 acres. And we just planted or seeded another 89 acres to prairie. And once that's ready to be grazed, then the rooters will expand their herd and the herd will be rotated on that 120 acres.
Now, can you just tell me, maybe explain a little bit more in detail how important grazing is to maintaining a habitat for somebody who may not understand necessarily what all it does for an area like the prairie?
Yeah, I'd love to take that one, Brad.
You want me to take it?
No, I'd love to take it.
Oh, please, and I'll follow up with something from my own.
All right, sounds good. So prairies require disturbance in order to be maintained as grassland habitat. And so historically, that disturbance occurred through fire and grazing, which was primarily done by bison. So today, we often have to create those disturbances with prescribed fire and mowing or mechanical grazing, which is obviously very different than how actual grazers would impact the landscape. So the benefit of grazing is that the bison create a more diverse vegetation structure, which can create microhabitats that support grassland birds, pollinators, other wildlife in ways that mowing can't do. And then grazing also benefits soil and environmental health by recycling nutrients, building organic matter, sequestering carbon, and improving water infiltration.
Yeah, the one thing I'd like to add to that, which is kind of interesting, is if you go back like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when we first started doing prairie restorations at the district, we use big blue stem Indian grass, switchgrass, when we call the tall grass species. And what we found out, if 3 or 4 years down the road, when we started doing bird surveys, we had these tall rank stands of prairies. And they weren't good for birds because they were just so thick and so tall. Those warm season tall grasses dominated. And so historically, prairies were so diverse that you would see, if you go to a really high quality remnant prairie, you see a big blue stem here and there and there. But in the meanwhile, there'd be all this plant diversity, so much competition that it wouldn't dominate. But since we were doing these restorations, we couldn't put in 150 species like we do, today. So we actually switched our prairie restorations to shorter grasses like cropseed, side oats, little blue, because we didn't have anything to control those dominant tall grass species. So now we have bison to do that. So they, as Brenna mentioned, they have all these ecological benefits, but they have a very practical benefit of trampling and eating and preferring grass, which releases area for the forbs or the wildflowers to go to. So it's really a perfect combination to manage grasslands. So our job is just to make sure they move and they kind of mimic what would be a natural grazing regime.
Now, what's just the experience been like so far? What have you seen just in what's happened so far?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the partnership that we have with Rooter Bison, it's been surprisingly smooth. We have a great relationship with the tenant because they do have similar values to the conservation district. So that's made it easy. We also have a wonderful staff and volunteers who've all really worked together to get the project off the ground and to keep it running smoothly. In terms of the bison themselves, they've been out there since December. It's actually amazing to me that you go out there and it doesn't look like they've done anything out there. The grasses are lush and green. It looks nothing like an overgrazed pasture. It's wonderful. So I'm really excited to see how things progress and when we can expand beyond what we've done so far.
What was go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead,
I was gonna say
Brett.
the picture behind me was actually just taken, I think, a week ago. We had a board meeting and they wanted to kind of celebrate the bison. And of course, we had it all, we thought all set up. Oh yeah, we'll come see them. And of course, the bison didn't cooperate. They kind of hid out in their corner. So as Brenna mentioned, they really haven't impacted the grass yet. It's very tall. They like a couple different areas. They'll graze back and forth. So we have a good ratio of a small ratio of bison to the habitat. So they're definitely doing well, but they're kind of acting like wild bison. They're just not walking along the fence. They kind of hide out and they don't want to be corralled or herded. They kind of do their own thing. So we weren't able to get everybody who came out at our last board meeting to see them, unfortunately, but if you do drive by, you will see them occasionally. They made a little wallow and kind of a micro habitat out there. So it's been really interesting to watch that behavior.
It's humorous that you say that they are very much, they're not cooperative with photos or things like that. But are there any other challenges that they've presented? Anything that kind of has popped up that you weren't expecting, or things that maybe caught you off guard?
Honestly, knock on wood, the bison have been not challenging at all. They haven't caused any issues. The only thing I'll say is whenever you're looking at integrating grazing on the landscape, for me, the biggest hurdles are figuring out your source of electricity and your source of water. And those were kind of big headaches for us for a little while, even though we were operating on an existing pasture and a farmstead that had electricity and water. It's an old farmstead, and we couldn't necessarily rely on the existing water lines, so we had to do some work there, and we had to reroute some access to electricity so that the fence could be electrified. But honestly, it's been very smooth.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, honestly, has been on the public side. Is we really want the public to come out there and see them, but as Brenna mentioned, it's an old farmstead. We're going to have to do some demo. We're going to have to do some site development. So the bison kind of got ahead, and that went really smoothly to get the bison on pasture. But what we need to do is develop that public access. So unfortunately, we're going to have some special tours and things like that, but it is not open to the public at this time.
Well, that kind of dovetails really nice into my next question. Or what are some of the future plans you have for this program? What are you hoping to see kind of blossom out of this?
Well, we definitely have some work to do when it comes to site development, and we're in the planning phase of that right now. We do have a 15-year lease with the Rooters. So, we have some time to get things squared away, but it is going to take a number of years to get the site ready for, truly equitable and accessible access for the public. So that's a challenge right now and a focus of what we're trying to do moving forward.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add, as Brenna mentioned, we are going to add at least 89 acres that were just seeded down of prairie, but then there wasn't another pasture south of that. So potentially we could actually add and have a total pasture of 160 to 170 acres in a couple of years from now. But we want the prairie to mature and be ready to be grazed. So I would hope in 3 years we could have more bison and they could be grazing up to, like I said, 160, 170 acres. And so we might see a total herd of 25, even 30 bison at that point.
Now, have you heard of any other agencies in the state working with bison, or is this something that's unique to your agency? I hadn't, like I mentioned, I hadn't really heard much about bison. So when I saw the story come by, it kind of caught me off guard. But have you heard of anybody else that's doing the same thing or something similar?
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually look to many of those other agencies for guidance on this process. So in Illinois, the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service have successfully reintroduced bison herds on public land to manage tallgrass prairie ecosystems. And so we visited with them. We talked about the challenges that they've dealt with and the partnerships that they've created, the management and monitoring protocols that they've used to really assess the impacts of grazing on the landscape. And so those are all tools and resources that we've relied on to get to where we are.
That's one of the things I really noticed a lot is being able to rely on others' experience. We've noticed that with so many of the things that park districts and conservation districts and forest preserves all do, they all have to kind of reach out to one another and figure out best practices and kind of break some of that ground sometimes, or follow a path that someone else has already done and kind of learn from some of those challenges that they've experienced. So yeah, sorry, Brad, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, and I actually think that what we're doing here can be a model for other public agencies. So, we're not land rich, but we have a lot of land. We have land that needs to be managed. And if we can find a producer and a bison producer, it's just a great fit. So we also have cattle that graze some of our land. So, bison's, for us, it's a little more exciting. For the public, it's a lot neater to see a bison out there. But yeah, other public agencies can certainly, utilize this model and make that work and have a kind of a complete grassland ecosystem.
Now, I liked something you said earlier too about how the partners that you're working with on this all have a similar mission, or at least similar goals. So how important is that to find those partners out there that you can align with, where you're already on the same path, you already want the same things? How important is that to find those partners and utilize what they've got?
For me, it's really valuable to, it just makes the process and the relationship go smoother when everyone's on the same page about what the goals are. Obviously, you as a producer and a conservation organization, the goals may not always line up or align as well. So this was a really unique situation with the rooters that I think worked out nicely for us.
Yeah, and that is actually one thing we talked about in the RFP, that we kind of narrowed that down, that, hey, we want to find somebody that has the same idea, not just going out there and grazing to produce meat, but we have all these ecosystem services and ecosystem benefits that we want to create as well. So I think that helped, and we just luckily really came and found each other, and it's worked out really well so far.
All right, excellent. Well, is there anything else you'd just like to tell somebody who might not know much about the work you guys are doing there? Is there anything else like to share?
I'll start with this. We this has been just such an exciting process, and it's been fun. I don't get down there enough to see the bison, but it's also spilled out. We've already gotten an Illinois Department of Natural Resources habitat grant, so that's going to help pay for additional restoration on that site. It's going to allow us to purchase a seed harvester. So what we try to do here is leverage our land, our staff, our money, to do more. And this is just a great project and a great example that we've been able to do a lot of good PR benefits, great grassland bird benefits. Brenna has worked on actually monitoring the new restoration, the soil and the soil health. So we're gonna learn a lot as we go, but it's also gonna continue to provide multiple benefits down the road.
Excellent.
For me, the value is, the benefit to the ecosystem, the wildlife that rely on that habitat, and seeing that really come to fruition is really exciting to be a part of. But what I have seen, the most important piece is just your network, your staff, and your team, and their willingness to contribute and be a part of the process, because just a couple of people can't accomplish something like this. It really takes all hands on deck to really make sure everything keeps running smoothly. So we're happy to be a resource for people and a source of information, but you have to have people on board to help with the process too.
All right. Well, I don't have any other questions for you, Brad and Brenna, but I appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with me a little bit more about this topic. I'm excited to just follow your path and see where this leads. So we'll be touching base here and there to follow along with you guys. So thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with us.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Wade.